Good morning, I'm Paul Chek, and welcome to Spirituality or 10 Commandments You Choose, Lesson 7, where we compare the Christian, Atheist, and Native American Indian 10 Commandments. Today we begin with Commandment 3. Let's once again review our model for comparison for those of you that may be entering in a later clip and have not seen the entire series. Our model for comparison is the love model taught by Osho, and our first stage of comparison is to look at what a God would be with a capital G-O-D, which could only be unconditional love. I haven't said this before, but I'll share it now. Any God other than an unconditionally loving God could not exist as a God, for the simple fact that if you can tell me anything about your God that I can objectify, for example, if you say my God's 1,000,000 miles high and 1,000,000 miles wide, all I've got to do is say, well, my God's 1,000,001 high and 1,000,001 wide, therefore my God's a bigger, better God than yours, which is the nature of all religious wars, that kind of comparison model. And any God that can be objectified, known, measured, weighed, experienced as an idea with a beginning, a middle, and an end, is essentially a conditional God. To have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which means an idea, all ideas have a beginning, a middle, and an end, means that you have basically put God into a structure which limits God and turns capital G-O-D into little g-o-d. So the unconditionally loving God is the highest form of God because simply it's beyond mind or idea itself. It is the source of all things. Stillness, silence, the unchangeable, that which can exist in and out of the universe simultaneously. Nothing but God can exist in creation and outside of creation because essentially capital G-O-D has no needs. Here you see my diagram, which represents the eye of the storm, so unconditional love is represented as the center. The further you go from the center of a tornado, the more violent it gets. So your sex and violence loving God is the God of I-ness. It's all about me. The conditionally loving God is the God of we-ness. When you've had enough pain in relationships, you get wise enough to start creating conditions so you can get along with people and seek to enjoy your life more fully. But eventually even that wears out because you'll find that whenever you put conditions on anybody in a relationship, the ego resists being controlled. And when we get tired of conditions, we start having empathy and compassion for love and life itself. And here I represent that as the Dalai Lama, who has exemplified that in every possible way, in my opinion. So with that comparison model revisited, let's move forward with our commandments. The third Christian commandment: you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Well, here we go. Let's start our comparison. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Well, first of all, if God is God, then who could be taking the Lord's name in vain other than God as God? God is the source of all creation, the source of all vibration, the source of mind itself. So the truth of the matter is if God is God, and there really is a God, then it's just God warring against God. It's God eating God. It's God swearing at God. And there's nothing here but God. So this again is essentially creating conditions around an idea, which is dangerous. Ideas will kill each other. As Richard Dawkins beautifully shows in the book The Selfish Gene, a meme or an idea has no respect for the gene. Ideas will kill life as we know it. So we must be very, very careful with the idea consciousness because, as we all know, things go better with Coke as an idea. But do they? Do they really? So ideas have no respect for the biological source or the gene itself, yet the gene is designed to protect itself, to perpetuate life. The commandment goes on, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Okay, well, I'll leave that to you. Is that sex and violence loving, a threat? Or is that conditional loving? Is that empathetic and compassionate loving? That's your call. I won't make that decision for you. I think the model makes it very easy to decide which kind of a God this is. And for my vote, there's no capital on the G-O-D here. This is a method of controlling people. The atheists' third commandment, treat your fellow human beings, your fellow living things, and the world in general with love, honesty, faithfulness, and respect. Well, sounds like empathy and compassion to me. Treat the world and the world in general with love, honesty, faithfulness, and respect. When someone's referring to the world in general, that is the model of all, which I equated to the Dalai Lama. Empathy and compassion always considers the needs of all beings involved. Our third commandment here is the Native American Indian third commandment, show great respect for your fellow beings, almost identical to the atheist 10 commandment. The reason for this is that the closer you get to the truth in any philosophy, the more common ground you find. So if we just stuck to the concept of God as unconditional love, then we come clear to the realization that we express as much or as little God as we choose to, and what chooses that is what is referred to as an ego. The ego essentially means self-identity, border, barrier, or definition, the illusion that you are separate from me, that I am separate from you, that the guy on the other side of the battlefield is somehow different than you, and killing that person has no bearing on your life. Yet if God is unconditional love, the ego becomes an illusion which just makes the game of life more fun so that we have something to participate with. Remember, at the level of unconditional love, there is no possible way to be aware of self as, because that's a condition. Your hand is a condition. Your body's a condition, a stone, a car, anything you can name, label, or identify as object is a condition. God is pure subject. When any object appears, there's an ego involved. So that gives you an opportunity to look at the third commandments with a little bit of clarity and a little bit of opportunity to meditate and ponder. Again, it is not my intention to make anybody wrong. I believe fully, though, that any philosophy worth living is worth challenging. And if we don't challenge our own philosophies, then we are essentially blind men wandering in the street. And when blind men start telling the people with eyes how to live, it gets to be a bit of a problem. And what's even more of a problem is when blind people are telling the sighted people how to live, and the blind does not mean blind in the real sense. It means ignorant to the truth of God, unable to see the truth of God. So the bigger problem is when people with sight or the potential for sight follow the blind just because everybody else is doing it. And as I've said before, if you want to see the results of that, turn on the news and there it is. You'll see that God supports anything and everything from kinky sex to violence to destruction to empathy and compassion. So you get to choose what part of God you want to be. These processes that we're seeing here are part and parcel with the creative and destructive forces of the entire universe. And if you look into the Holy Trinity of the Hindu religion, it's very, very well described there how the process of life emerges, expresses itself, and folds back into itself. There's nothing happening here that's not happening everywhere in the universe. So I hope you enjoyed the comparison for the third commandments of the different philosophies. You can see on my slide here related products. You're welcome to visit my various websites, ppssuccess.com, chekinstitute.com, checkconnect.com, and you can view my blog at paulchek.com. Thanks for joining me. I've enjoyed sharing with you. I'll see you for our next lesson. Bye-bye.